I'm SC Moatti. I'm the founder of Products That Count. And prior to Products That Count, I spent a dozen years building products and companies myself. I used to work for Civil Systems and Facebook and Nokia, and Matin and I overlapped at Facebook for some time. Products That Count is the largest and most influential product acceleration platform. And so we offer a combination of events and webinars like this one, popular podcast show, a lot of articles, executive events. All of our content is authored by product leaders. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the founding CEO of Heap, who's an amazing platform as well, a product analytics platform. We're big fans of the offering, and if you haven't tried it, I really recommend you do. So Matin, welcome, and if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll dive into a discussion.
Thanks for having me, SC. Good to meet everybody. I'm Matin. As SC mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO at Heap. We build a product analytics tool that makes it as effortless as possible for product teams to understand how their users use their product. And a lot of how we built Heap was inspired by my prior time as a product manager. So I've been both a practitioner of product management and building tools for product teams in various industries and different company sizes. So I've seen some interesting patterns. Hopefully I can be helpful and educational to all of you today.
Awesome. So Matin, what we're going to do is we're going to do a fireside chat for about 25 minutes or so. And we're going to talk about data. We're going to talk about product teams. We're going to talk about cross-functional relationships for product managers, how you make the most out of your influential powers. And then we'll open it up for everyone's questions, and we'll wrap up in about 55 minutes or so. For folks in the audience, when you have questions, when you have topics that are top of mind for you, please add them to the chat. I'm not going to look at the chat until after Matin and I are done chatting, because I have some stuff I want to make sure I cover. But once we're done chatting, I'll look at it and I'll bring up a few questions. So please, if you have specific topics, don't hold them in your head, just put them in the chat and join us back into the live discussion. All right, so Matin, you and I, every time we talk about data, right? Data is super important, but it's also not enough. And so, tell me a little bit how you think about turning data into insights and action. How does that work?
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question. We all know data is a thing, but how do we actually make data useful and actionable? So obviously, this is a big theme that we focus on at Heap, so I have a lot of thoughts. I'll start with something that it is not. It is not fancy AI and ML. I don't think it's that simple. I think there are especially a lot of tools out there now who are trying to basically ride that wave and suggest that the only thing keeping your data from being actionable is fancy AI and ML. And to me, if a product is being positioned that way to you, I think you should run away, because that to me is a sign of technology trying to find a solution, not the other way around. So I'll start with that. I think it is not, decidedly not that. I also think it's when we talk about data, context matters a lot. I don't think it's as simple as just data becomes actionable because of tooling. At the end of the day, you have to know what your goals are, and you have to be extremely crisp to yourself as a business, as a product team, what you're actually trying to do. Are you trying to improve retention? Are you trying to improve conversion? Are you trying to understand whether a certain feature worked? There are so many types of questions you can ask. So context matters in terms of making data actionable. It's like if you're holding a ball and someone's telling you do something with that ball, you kind of have to understand, is it a tennis ball, football? What sport am I playing? Am I on the red team, blue team? So you can't really make it actionable without that bigger context. And I'll also say too, I think there's a notion we have that data can just become actionable via some presentation of that data. When I don't know about you, but I've never looked at a dashboard, no matter how beautiful, no matter how pristine, carefully curated by a data team, a single data point or a single dashboard has never been sufficient to get me to take action. Like I don't know if others feel the same way, but for me to know how to take action, I need to dig in, really immerse myself with the context. And if you think about it, a lot of what makes a data valuable is driving you to that next question to understand how to get even more data and to really immerse yourself in the context of the customer and the product. Like if I tell you that your onboarding flow is at 20%, 20% of people are going through and getting activated, naturally that's going to prompt questions like, okay, well, where in that onboarding flow? What are people doing instead? How long has it been 20% instead of whatever we want it to be, 50%? And who are the types of people? And what is the breakdown between more sophisticated users and non-sophisticated users? So I think it's very imperative for product teams to be able to self-serve and let the people who have the context dig in, get that data, immerse themselves in it so that it can actually be actionable.
And it's really interesting what you say, because, you know, in many kind of large enterprises, PMs don't have access to data, right? They have to go to an analyst who's going to run some report. It's going to take forever. It's like, oh, great. So 20% of people, like you said, right, are going through my onboarding flow. Well, now I have 5 questions. All right, I'm going back to my analyst. I'm asking my 5 questions. I'll get them in a month, maybe, if I'm lucky, right? And so how do you help product managers actually get access to data in that immersive way, right? Like very dynamic way that you're describing? Like, how does that happen?
So I'm going to go into sell mode here a little bit. This is the thesis behind Heap, and an experience that I had myself when I was a PM in a prior life, where I experienced a lot of what you described, SC. You know, there's fancy analytics tooling and data tooling, but oftentimes when I had a question, I had bottlenecks like having to get engineers to write tracking code, wait for that code to go live, wait for data to come in. Once the data is there, I need to gut check it with the data team or the analytics team to make sure I'm not analyzing the wrong thing. As I mentioned earlier, 10 questions will emerge from data exploration, and then you have to rinse and repeat that process. And so it's just the people who have the business context and who have all the questions are way too far removed from the actual data motions themselves. So if we can combine those things, if we can give kind of data superpowers to the people who have those business questions and that business context, then our belief is that that allows them to make much better decisions, build better products, and ultimately have much happier customers. And so that's the foundation of our platform. And specifically to your question, how we achieve that in Heap, we take this approach of actually capturing all of the data up front. That's the most unique differentiator of our product. We capture all of the data up front on that customer journey. So every single interaction they take, not just the interaction that you thought to track up front. And we give you all of that, and then we make it easy for you to be able to organize that data and to be able to ask questions about that data so that we can eliminate those bottlenecks. When you have a question, ideally you don't have to go through a bunch of crap work just to get the answer.
I like that pitch. One thing I want to ask you is, you know, as PMs, yes, we can very well get, you know, we're all curious people. We get into the data. We can kind of get lost in it. Some people even get into maybe a little bit of analysis paralysis. If I see some head, yeah, I see some smiles. Okay, that's familiar. But a lot of times we use data to actually, you know, sell ourselves internally. Like, this is what we should be building. This is what we should be changing in our product. And so we need to influence other teams and use data to do that. But again, you know, that there's a certain way to do it. There's a more effective or not. We'd love to hear some best practices from you to use data to facilitate cross-functional collaboration and really just building better products.
That's a really big question. I think first off, it doesn't start with the data. It starts with the goals. Data is a means to an end, right? Data by itself is not that valuable. I don't think any of us necessarily became product managers or product leaders because we're excited about playing data all day. We want to I assume we want to be product leaders because we want to build stuff that matters and align teams to be able to build stuff that matters. So the number one best practice is to be really good at aligning teams. And data is just one of those mechanisms. And what I always try to encourage companies to do is to have a balance between quantitative data and qualitative data. I think quantitative data is extremely good at aligning you on whether you succeeded or not. It's hard if you ship something, ideally you have some hypothesis about shipping that thing, whether you're implicit about that hypothesis or explicit. You're trying to learn something. You have some view of the world or have some view of the customer that you are trying to get validity on by shipping that feature or that product. And so quantitative data and analytics is really good for aligning teams on, did we actually succeed on that? And if not, where did we fall short and how can we do better? So I think quantitative data is really good at assessing success. I think in terms of generating hypotheses, a great way to get alignment is talking to customers together, in short. So we use this method at Heap ourselves when figuring out our own product roadmap and trying to get aligned as a company. We use this process we call waves. And really that's just a term we use for basically a bunch of key decision makers being really structured in how they get customer feedback. So to make this a little bit more concrete, one of the waves that we might have at Heap is we'll spend a week with our at-risk customers. So customers who are not necessarily healthy, but at risk of churn. And what we'll do is we'll create a presentation that contains things like our vision as a company, contains things like our roadmap, the pitch for Heap today, pricing, and then exercise at the end to get their synthesis, as well as have them rank different parts of our roadmap. And we'll use that to both validate whether our roadmap and our pitch resonates with these at-risk customers, as well as understand common trends among these customers that we can then take back to the broader organization and align them on. It's like, oh, at-risk customers have problems sharing insights internally. And we'll have specific quotes, we'll have on the ground, you can call it data, but really it's qualitative data that helps everybody at the company align on, okay, these are the initiatives we need to take. And that's really powerful because it avoids that effect where, I don't know if you're the same way, but if somebody just comes back to you and reports some synthesis of a bunch of customer conversations, it's always fundamentally, we as humans we want to see the data ourselves. And so being able to see how the customers react, seeing the words they use, doing that together as a team in 1 week where you have back-to-back customer meetings drives a level of alignment unlike anything else I've seen. And that helps generate at a high level the direction that you need to take as a company. And so I always encourage teams to do some version of that for their own areas within the company.
I love it. And I've been part of several of your waves, and I can agree 100% with you. It's so interesting to see the listening of like how are we going to listen to the customers in a qualitative way, and then apply that into our strategic planning, and then using quantitative data to basically as a lagging indicator to demonstrate the results. I want to project us into the future a little bit, because a lot of what I'm hearing, and I hear that from all of those PMs here and a lot of folks we talk to, a lot of the challenges product teams have is that cross-functional collaboration. It's a lot about leading by influence, leading without authority. We hear more and more that product teams are now, in some industries, getting budget authority, getting decision-making authority. And so all that data that you and your team at Heap is helping us get is in a way building the case for a much stronger product function. So if you were going to project 5 years out or so, what do you see over the horizon? What kind of practices do you think teams will have adopted that are just beginning today?
Yes, this is, again, a deep question that we can talk about for hours. I'll say at a high level, I believe product teams will be far more rigorous than they ever have been. And I think a reason they haven't been super rigorous in the past, it's been a couple of reasons. One is it's hard to measure success on the product side relative to, say, our peers in sales or marketing. And the feedback loops are longer. So if you have some sort of product initiative, you have to ship it, you have to iterate on it, you have to wait for it to go live, you have to wait for customer feedback on it, you have to wait for it to drive some behavior that down the road drives some revenue or some growth. And so the feedback loops are really long. And when feedback loops are long, that exacerbates the measurement issue. And when something's hard to measure, it's harder to justify budget for it. That's just how organizations work. So I think what we'll see is a couple things. Ultimately, product teams will need to be more rigorous. It's actually like if you step back and think about how fast and loose some product teams are and how some product leaders are, it is actually quite astonishing. And I think a major indictment of a lot of the fiduciary duty that leaders have, which is fundamentally if product teams are helping orient the company product direction, and more specifically, they're helping orient the engineering work that happens. Engineers are really expensive. You talk to a lot of companies and they complain about engineers being hard to hire, being a constant bottleneck on growth and velocity. So it seems like we should invest a little bit of money, a little bit of time to make sure that those engineers are doing things that actually matter for the business. And obviously we believe this is a big market opportunity for Heap to bridge that gap, but it is astonishing how many product leaders, how many CEOs get away with being very fast and loose in terms of following some CEO's vision or pet project, as opposed to just taking a little bit of time to ascertain, did the stuff we do actually matter? Did it actually move the needle for the business? And what I think you'll see is that companies, you'll be one of two types of companies. You'll be a company that takes product rigor really seriously, or you will be out executed by one that does. Because if you can be just marginally better at measuring and understanding whether your product efforts matter, you'll move faster in the long run, and you'll lap the incumbents or companies who don't take that level of rigor seriously. So I think I think that will entail a lot of practices, one of which obviously is elevating data in terms of the product team's discourse. But I think there will be thematically more and more investment in making product teams rigorous.
Yeah, when we ask product leaders today, like, how much of your engineering resources do you think you're wasting because there's an ineffective product organization? Generally, we hear 30%, right? Like 30%, like a third of my engineering capacity is lost because, people are working on the two same things and they just don't know, right? Because they're more like project managers gathering the facts after the work is done than product managers, right? Setting the roadmap proactively, like lots of different inefficiencies. So it's huge. And then when we ask that question about projecting, 5 years out, the North Star that I like is the one we're in right now. It's Zoom, right? Like Zoom is one of the winners of our product awards, but it's also a company that has 50% of the video market, and it competes against Google, against Microsoft, which have basically infinite distribution, free products, right? So how do you get a product like Zoom to get that kind of performance? It's with a world-class product team, right? Data-driven, super smart, really seeing the value of great products. And that's, I think, a role model for all of us, right? All of us in product. I have a few more questions for you, Matin, but I want to encourage folks to post in the chat. I saw Randy already made some awesome contributions. I love that quote. But if you would post in the chat, we're going to be going through a couple more questions, and then we'll move to the Q&A part. So start the noggin. So one question for you, Matin, is how do you keep a product team focused on innovation, right? Like, how do you, it's our job, right, to bring innovation inside corporations, large and small. How do you keep that focus?
I wish I had an easy rule of thumb, and there are some rules of thumb that exist, like spend 50% of your time improving existing features and 50% of time on new features. or a common one is kind of the 7-20-10 investment thesis of 70% on existing things, 20% on things on the frontier, and then 10% on moonshot ideas. I have not found many of those frameworks to be that useful in practice, and actually somewhat harmful in practice, because innovation to me implies doing new shiny things, which is not always the right thing to do. So at the core, you have to listen to your customers and understand, are you delivering on your existing promise? Or do they run into really annoying issues like the product being slow or flaky, in which case you don't get to innovate yet. You have to deliver on the existing promise that you've made to customers. And then once you have that, then you can, once you feel like you have high quality in the existing product investments, then you can start thinking about this thing we call innovation. But I would say, by and large, actually, I find myself trying to get the product team to focus less on quote innovation, or I'm making an assumption in your question, SC, which is innovation is it corresponds with shiny new features, and maybe that's not your intent. But I find it's very easy for teams and organizations to get obsessed with shiny new features and underinvest in just follow through and polish an existing functionality. I call this the boardroom pathology, where it's easy to get a boardroom of a bunch of execs excited about something that you can put in a slide, like something that you can pitch and seems shiny. But if you think about it, you mentioned a great example, actually, Zoom. Or if you take something like Slack, Zoom swept the floor with WebEx, Slack swept the floor with HipChat. And imagine trying to work at one of those companies, at Atlassian or Cisco, and you're trying to make a pitch for Zoom. Imagine, like, what would that boardroom pitch look like? I don't know what that would look like. Like, hey, it's basically the same thing, but it's faster and it gets all these little details right. I don't know how I would convince that organization to focus fully on Zoom, because maybe the organization would argue that doesn't feel innovative enough. But obviously we see the benefit of getting all those little details right and following through and being maniacally focused results in that 50% market share that you mentioned. So I think innovation is a bit of a red herring. I think there's always an endless well of quality and polish that you can pursue with your existing investments. So I find myself actually trying to get teams to focus on that more often than big, bold, crazy innovation.
So in a way, it's like, yeah, the vanity metrics, they're almost like a career killer, right? Like, focus on the true metrics, like the revenue, the market share, the cost efficiency, stuff like that, right? Stuff that really moves the needle.
Your attention, you ship stuff, do people actually complete that flow? Performance, quality, bug reports, NPS. There's so much iterative low-hanging fruit you can do there that I think it would behoove product teams to spend more time glorifying that type of work rather than glorifying what's shiny or new.
Yeah. Before we open up for questions, I want to come back to the cross-functional aspect. Lots of teams, when you look in the enterprise, have ways that they collaborate, right? You look at sales, customer success, marketing, they find ways, sometimes efficient, sometimes less so, to collaborate. But product is sort of like operating in a bit of its own bubble, right? Like, how do you get a product manager to say they have a roadmap that took into account all the different needs? Well, maybe they don't really want to tell because they make decisions that are sort of right for the corporations, but not necessarily completely democratic. So tell me a little bit, what's your perspective on that? Like, why hasn't there been more shared systems in product?
This is really, really fascinating question. I think about this a lot. If you look at things like marketing and sales, there are very well-trodden playbooks for how to run those teams and what marketing and sales excellence looks like, at least for digital product companies. And why doesn't that exist for product? I think the short answer is it's just way harder to measure product success. And product success is less directly tied to some high-level business outcome. So if you look at something like sales, closing deals directly impacts revenue. And so you can more easily understand what works and what doesn't on the sales side. So you can more quickly, as a ecosystem, develop best practices for what works in sales. Similarly, for marketing, you can really easily tie marketing efforts to things like cost of acquisition. You can generally know, okay, I'm spending this much and these types of marketing efforts are expensive in X way or Y way, though obviously understanding the ROI of that is almost more like an art than a science. But generally, we just have better feedback loops and better measurement capabilities for those systems. So it's easier for us to iterate on best practices for marketing and sales. Product, as we all know, it is very hard to measure success on a product. Even if you set KPIs for your product team and you move those KPIs, you don't necessarily know that those KPIs actually matter for the business, and you kind of have to do some art to connect the dots there. So I think one reason is we just don't have the measurement capabilities to understand what really works and what doesn't in the world of product. I think that's one thing, and that's something we obviously want to make a lot easier with Heap. We believe if we can make it easier to measure product success and connect that to business outcomes, that product teams and product efforts will get the appropriate level of investment and attention that they deserve, and that we all know that they deserve. Like, we all know product is in many ways the crown jewel of overall company promise to their customers. I also think we should keep in mind product management, at least in the realm of software and digital products, is actually rather new and rather nascent. So the sales and product management has existed for a very long time in other industries outside of online software. But obviously software changes the dynamics of product management, in that the practices for iterating on products, measuring products, distributing products is just fundamentally different. So we should recognize it's actually a fairly nascent field. And I think I shouldn't say most companies, but a lot of companies have modeled their product management discipline and practice after companies like Microsoft and Google, who were quite pioneers in terms of thinking about mechanizing how you deliver and how you build products. Those companies, in the grand scheme of things, aren't that old. So I think part of it is these practices are more nascent. They are quite a bit more different in the realm of digital products, and they are harder to measure. And so these things make it difficult for us to establish a shared playbook. I will say, I think this is a huge opportunity. I love organizations like Products That Count, that are helping more people actually understand best practices for building a product. Like, we shouldn't have product management be relegated to just a select few. We want more people to be good at product management so that it's easier for better products to get built in mass. I think that's a really, really good and positive movement. And I'm glad organizations like this exist to make that possible.
Yeah. That's our North Star. That's our mission, to make sure that anyone can build great products. So thank you for that. One more question for you before I take questions from the audience. What inspires you? What are the podcasts, the books, the newsletters that keep you sharp on product and or beyond product, right? Your life.
The inspire and stay sharp are somewhat different things. I actually find what inspires me is always just talking to customers. And that might sound a little cheesy, but every time I talk to customers, whether they're existing customers or they use a competitor product or they're considering using a product like ours, I'm always reminded of just how many customer problems we have yet to solve. And that bottomless well of opportunity is immensely exciting to me. And I always try to reinforce internally at Heap, but more broadly, just all the opportunity that we have. And that at the end of the day, to me, is very exciting. In terms of staying sharp, there's what I have found has influenced my product thinking the most is actually the field of behavioral economics. So thinkers like Dan Kahneman, Richard Taylor, who think about how do people make decisions and how do they behave. And at the end of the day, we build products to try to influence people's behaviors. Sounds kind of like manipulative and skeezy, but ideally we're manipulating their behaviors in a way that's positive for them and positive for the world. And I think behavioral economics has been a very fascinating field for understanding at the ground level, how do people behave and what are different ways you can influence people's decision making.
Awesome. Matin, thank you so much. That was so cool and so fun. Questions from folks. I have a few questions in the chat. One being, can you tell us about products that improve invisibly, like products that we don't see improve? I can think of a few. You know, I mean, our time at Facebook is a time of you know, dozens, millions, I don't know, of invisible steps forward, backward, left, right, and many small improvements. But we'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I'm reading, there's some really good substantive comments in here that I'm reading.
Yeah.
View on that. I think these quote invisible changes are what make great products and great experiences. And if you think about a lot of the products that are winning today and getting a lot of adoption, again, I don't know how you would actually pitch those things, but we use them because we know they're so frictionless. We know that they're fast. We know that they deliver on their promise. And that doesn't happen with one or two shiny features. It happens with a bajillion features that are like very focused on just solving a few pain points for customers. So I think you'll continue to see fragmentation of markets where there are more products solving more narrow use cases. And that's good for us as consumers, because that means we'll have those use cases better served. We'll have more choice, and just the economical consequence of more choice is better, more vicious competition to build better experiences. My favorite example of a product that invisibly improves is Google. Google, I don't know if people here understand the degree to which I assume a tool that all of us use every day has changed so fundamentally in the past 10 years. So in some ways better than others. They've gone a little crazy in terms of ads and how much real estate that takes. But it's really a fascinating product to me in terms of how it improves invisibly. And invisible here means things like speed, ranking, all the stuff that we take for granted. I remember 10 years ago, which doesn't feel that long ago, but I suppose it's forever ago, where I would have to be very conscious of how I framed a query to Google. I would be like, okay, if I have a specific question I want to ask, I have to like have the right terms, but I'm not going to frame it in natural language. And I don't know about all of you, but nowadays I can just kind of frame a natural language query to Google. I don't have to think twice about how I'm constructing the query. And I usually get the results I want. If it exists on the internet, I usually get the results I want. Not to mention all the work that they've done to streamline just getting you to that answer without you having to click through on their search engine result page. So Google to me is just, I think people don't appreciate the amount of work from the outside, the amount of work that they've done to make their search engine just stellar. So that's one example. I think what that means for us as product leaders is we have to be careful to acknowledge and celebrate those invisible wins and internally get teams to recognize them. Data helps in making the case for those invisible wins in terms of, hey, if we ship this feature, did it impact retention and how much? That helps us better celebrate these invisible wins that we know accumulate together to build great product experiences. So I don't know if that answered the question.
That's a great answer. Another question is, give us an open source product success. I love this.
Open source, what do you mean? Successful in the open source?
A product that is leveraging open source technology and has been successful. The example given is you know, Zoom versus Jitsi, but if you can think of an open source product that's been super successful. I can think of a few.
Oh, interesting.
Like I'm looking at
this is the second to last question by Craig.
Yeah, Craig.
I actually don't know what Jitsi is. I've never heard of Jitsi. In terms of open source, I don't know, this is really testing my knowledge of the broader ecosystem, but there are successful open source products in that a lot of developers use them. And then there are successful businesses built on open source. And it makes me really sad that the intersection between those two things is vanishingly small. There are great examples of companies that have taken open source technology and used that to build a massive business. I'm thinking of things like Confluent that have taken advantage of the runaway success and proliferation of Kafka to build a massive business. MongoDB, really successful business. Elastic, astounding businesses that have done a good job of proliferating technology, making them the standard, and finding ways to monetize that. And it seems like providing cloud hosted solutions of those things has been a pretty good, pretty repeatable monetization model, despite the threat from cloud players like Amazon and Google. But there are lots of really successful open source projects that make no money for the maintainer. And the bunch of tools that I have used back when I was building up the prototype of Heap, and I would not have been able to build Heap without the availability of those open source products. I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but I wish there were better ways to incentivize open source maintainers and creators, because so much of what we build today, what product teams are building today, depends on the work that they do, and they capture none of that economic value, and we're not properly incentivizing them to maintain and innovate in open source. So open source product, very different than successful open source businesses. But hopefully that's helpful, Craig.
The one I can think of is Mozilla. They're a great partner of ours, and they're also the product that really emerged for against Google, right, with higher performance and kind of a Zoom story, although the market share isn't as impressive, but really like great market adoption in a space that was so completely dominated by Microsoft and Google, based on open source technology and some key, very consumer focused differentiators. Next question is about an early stage company, right? So what makes the biggest difference at the early stage? Is it the customer traction? Is this the marketing? Is this the early sales? Is it the engineering? What's the biggest determinant to startup success?
Reading the question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is interesting. It depends. I wish I could give you a very crisp answer, but I don't think that just does justice to reality. I think there are two things to consider. One is the success of your product market fit thesis at a high level, and then the success of the specific feature. So when we're thinking about success, how low level are we being versus high level? And then there's a set, you can almost draw a 2x2 here. Like, how low level is the thing you're assessing the success of versus how high level, and then what is the maturity of the business? And so generally, the earlier stage you are, the more you need to rely on qualitative factors to assess success, because you just don't have as much data. And so that early on, I can speak for Heap at least, we knew we were onto something when A, customers were willing to pay for what we were building, and B, they were willing to renew with us. And then in between, we had to look at a bunch of qualitative factors, because obviously if you sign with Heap, you renew in 12 months, you can't just wait 12 months, sit on your hands and figure out, hey, have we built a successful product or not? And so we had to be really qualitative and understand, how are they using it? And fundamentally, we needed to look at, was this actually driving things that mattered for the business? Or was this just driving a bunch of low-level decisions that didn't really matter? And when we saw that our customers were bringing up Heap data, Heap metrics within the boardroom to justify big product investments, we use that qualitative insight to say, like, okay, we're onto something here, let's double down. And then the lower level and the higher level you are, I think it's the lower level you are, the more you can rely on data, like product data. The higher level you are, the more you can rely on financial, high-level business data, but that becomes more of a lagging indicator. So you need to talk to customers and understand how they use your product, how they think about you relative to competition, whether that account is in a healthy state. And there's no one size fits all there. You have to use a combination of quant and qualitative.
I'm getting a few questions in one-on-one chat, so I'm gonna take these and then we'll go back to the main chat. One is about accountability. So product leaders and keeping their product team accountable. Earlier, you were saying, Matin, how it's so hard to assess like what makes a great product, right? What is product success? So therefore, hard to assess what makes a successful product manager. So we'd love to hear your perspective on accountability for PMs.
Yeah, it starts with being really clear what PMs own at your company. I know at some companies they own things like the spec. At some companies they might have more of a GM model where they're actually accountable for certain business metrics. At Heap, we have them accountable for a few things. They're accountable for clear justification. So they need to make a really good case. They're the ones who need to make a case for the direction that their team is taking and why. So they focus a lot on the why. Two is they need to make sure that what we're doing actually moves the business. So they need to connect the dots between the work that the team is doing and the business outcome. And then finally, they're responsible for driving alignment. So once you're really clear about what PMs own, note I did not say things like they own things like quality, or they own things like speed, or they own things like project management. We try to offload as much of that as we can on product managers, and even things like speccing out a feature, we don't have our PMs drive that. We have our engineering and design teams drive that once PMs are extremely clear about the problem space, the customer context, and the opportunities. So given those few things, we have a number of accountability mechanisms. On the justification side, we have our PMs write a lot. They do a lot of writing. So they'll codify both the context of the customer, the market, the current state of the product, the business goals, and then they'll write out what the next 12 months roadmap is, what the big themes are, and then why that matters for the business. And so writing, to me, is the best way to clarify and crystallize thinking. And so we pay really close attention to those artifacts. In terms of driving business outcomes, this is where we look at, hey, you've done a bunch of work as a product team. Help us understand the business picture there. And that's a conversation. That's not just you look at a scorecard, you look at a dashboard. It's a conversation. It is understanding to what degree we've learned. It's never a linear path of just you ship something and it moves the needle in the business. And then the last piece around alignment and getting the team on board, you can assess by talking to their peers and understanding, talk to engineers, designers, salespeople, marketing people. Hey, to what degree is this person giving you clarity on what needs to happen? So that's how we do it at Heap.
That's a high bar. I love it. We have a few more questions, but I'm going to alternate. So Craig, you have another question. Compare and contrast action data to intentional data, right? So it's related to behavioral economics, like people say they're going to do something, and then they do something else. What's most useful?
Yeah, they're both useful. You need both. You can't lean too heavily on one or the other. I find the latter to be particularly good early in a product lifecycle. So if you've identified a customer problem and you have some hypotheses of what you want to solve, surveys, focus group, customer feedback can be a really great way to assess, are we on the right path here? Are we positioning this problem correctly? Do we have the right sense of the solution? That intentional data, as you call it, is a great way to validate, are we on the right track before committing engineering resources. And then once you've shipped the thing, then you can use action data to understand, hey, did our hypotheses bear out and are people actually using this in the way we expected?
Love it. Another question from private chat. How are product organizations getting ready for scale? Like, how do you help them scale? Or how do you get ready for scale?
How do we help them get ready for scale? So I would say that there's two aspects of that. One is we try to give hands-on guidance on just how to think about structuring their product team. And generally, as a product team scales, alignment becomes the dominant factor of success versus necessarily doing exactly the right thing. That's a big thing I learned in the evolution of Heap, which is early on, it's alignment you can take for granted. If you're 10 people and you have 5 customers, it's kind of easy to know what needs to happen because you have pretty tight connection to your customers and you don't have a number of different markets or personas that you're serving. But as you grow, as the market becomes fuzzier, as the customer problems become less clear and more multifarious in nature, as you start having more people internally with different opinions, all of which are valid and reasonable, alignment becomes the biggest barrier to actually getting things done, as opposed to necessarily getting the exact right prioritization or building the exact right feature. So as you scale, it's thinking about how do you get people on the same page is way more important than focusing on building exactly the right thing. I like the vector math analogy from Elon Musk here. Like organization is just a bunch of different vectors, and you ideally want to align those vectors to maximize velocity and output. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it, obviously a great mechanism to align teams, is data and metrics. We had this hypothesis. Did that actually bear out in reality? Data and metrics are a great way to align people. Even setting things like, what is our notion of success metrics? Before we launch anything, going through the exercise of we expect this to move X metric by Y% is a great alignment exercise. And to me, actually, is maybe most of the value in setting success metrics, less about accountability, but more about being really crisp with yourselves. Are you trying to solve the right problem? And the exercise of going through success metrics helps you do that. So we could go on. That's like a really deep topic, but hopefully that gives some good high level context.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you, Matin. A couple more questions and then we will wrap up. One question about how can product managers stay sharp on like engineering, right? So is there like a programming language or is there a methodology that's an engineering methodology that you recommend besides the usual like HTML for PMs who want to keep their tech chops sharp?
Yes, and I'll directly answer the question, then I'll give an annoying answer as well. The direct answer, so SQL is always great. I think more and more companies are obviously investing in having centralized data, and a lot of our customers will have Heap data connect to their warehouse. And so to the extent that you as a product manager can use SQL, or even just think in SQL-like ways to query data and understand data, that will make you much more impactful. So general data literacy helps, and SQL is a great way to gain data literacy. I'll give an annoying answer to this. It's a great question, but I also do think to some degree, technical chops and coding chops are a little overrated. Like that's what engineers are for. I think I think a lot of PMs would be far better served learning how to talk with customers and do customer discovery. So this is actually, we all know it's pretty trite at this point that you should talk to customers, talk to the market, blah, blah, blah. We all know, but what I found, not every customer conversation is the same. There's a real art to doing discovery. In the same way that there's an art and a method to great sales. You don't just talk to a prospect and sell your product breathlessly. You ask great questions to understand what their needs are, where they're at in their buying cycle, and ultimately whether your product is a good fit. And I think customer discovery, I see a lot of PMs not take that practice seriously. A common mistake, just to make it more concrete, a common mistake I'll see is PMs asking customers what their problems are with their product. Like, hey, how could our product be better? And then the customer will say a bunch of things and then they'll be like, great, we're going to prioritize this immediately. That's actually, you're leading the customer to offer a bunch of problems to you. And that doesn't mean that those problems matter. They only matter in the context of your product. You would be far better served trying to get a higher level sense of what their priorities are and then working backwards from that to figure out where your product can fit into those priorities. Things like asking yes or no questions as opposed to open-ended questions to really do discovery. I think this is a practice that we need to get product managers at large to be much better at.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah,
I hope it was helpful to go in that different direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. Like if there are very few things I would do differently, but one of them is as a PM and trained as an engineer, I would learn sales like super early in my career, like go sell cars, you know, like do something that's really hard to do. So we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. One is, you mentioned this qualitative research. We'd love to hear a success story, like some qualitative research that actually influenced the course of the roadmap or the trajectory of your business.
Yeah, it's what we found. So the wave process I was mentioning earlier, I think by far the biggest benefit there was alignment, as opposed to any one eureka customer learning. And so to give an example here, we did some customer waves a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, roughly, where we went to some of our most successful customers. So we just spent a week back-to-back meetings with our successful customers where we would pitch them on Heap, our vision, roadmap, and then get their feedback on what resonated with them the most. And it was so powerful to see consistent themes. And specifically one consistent theme there was our customers wanted better ways to govern the data. So the way that Heap works is we collect a lot of data on your behalf. And so that can be really powerful because we make it easy for you to find a needle in the haystack, but sometimes that can be overwhelming if we don't give you the proper tools to organize and govern that data. And people at the company kind of knew that was a problem. That wasn't a big surprise. We knew that was a way in which we can make our product better. But seeing that so consistently from customers when we had back-to-back meetings, seeing that theme consistently, and all of the key decision makers of the company, including me, sitting in those meetings together and observing that customer feedback together, in 1 week, we were able to recognize, okay, this needs to be our top priority for next quarter. And I've never seen that type of alignment and crispness of prioritization come from any other method we've used. So that's one success story, but there are many success stories like that where we kind of suspect something is an issue. We all see it together from the customer's mouths, and then we just know, okay, we have to focus on this for the next quarter or two.
Awesome. So there's a lot more questions, but we're going to be wrapping up. I want to wrap up by thanking you, Matin. I learned a lot and had also a really good time, as always, when we chat. Is there something that you want to share as a parting thought with everyone?
As a parting thought, if you have issues with analytics or more broadly trying to connect the dots between the work you're doing and justifying why it matters to the business, come talk to me. Even if you're not necessarily in the market for product analytics, would love to learn from you, and hopefully I can be helpful to you as well. And these are some really great, thoughtful questions. So thank you everyone for the deep engagement here. And thank you, SC, for having me. Likewise, always enjoy our discussions.
What's the best way to contact you, and what's the best way to learn about Heap for folks who are interested?
Great question. So you can go to heap.io, tells you about our product, and you'll be able to use it from there. You can follow us on Twitter @Heap. And if you have any questions for me or ways in which I can help, just ping me directly, Matin, my first name, @Heap.io.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Matin. Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Great to see everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.